Hello everyone, my name is Andrew Barry and I'm the Euphonium Representative and co-director of the Atlanta Low Brass Academy. In today's video, we're going to be going over some practice techniques that you can utilize when approaching the GMEA All-State Band Etude for 2021-2022 Middle School Lyrical. Now, it's a fairly simple etude in nature, but there are enough things that we need to unpack here and talk about before approaching this etude. So let's do that. Let's first look at the key signature. We have one flat and it's B flat, which means we are in concert F major. So every time we practice this etude, let's go over our concert F major scale on our scale sheet so that we have a solid understanding of the finger and note patterns that we're mostly going to be using throughout the etude. Next is the time signature. We're in 4/4, which means the quarter note gets the beat and there are 4 quarter notes per measure. Now, tempo and style markings. These are very important. It's marked quarter note equals 66, larghetto. Now, larghetto is a bit faster than largo, which means slow. So we want the music to be slow, but since it's marked larghetto, we want it to have more of a sense of forward motion with everything we're playing. That will really capture the larghetto style nicely. Next, let's talk about rhythm. The rhythms on this page are fairly simple, but there's some 16th notes here and there that might trip you up. So before we play the etude, let's set a metronome to 66 beats per minute and let's clap and count the rhythms, and we'll do that together now. We're going to ignore the 2 retards written in and the fermata, so that way we can go from the beginning of the etude to the end without stopping and solely focus on the rhythms that are written on the page. One, two, ready, and 1 and 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2, and 4, and 1, 2, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, 1, and 3, and 4, 1, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, 4, 1, and 2, 3, and 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3. Great. So let's do this a couple times before you start approaching the etude. So again, make sure you have a solid understanding of the rhythm. Once you feel comfortable clapping and counting with the metronome, take away the metronome and add back in the retards and the fermata. Now, let's talk a bit more musically. We have a couple dynamics written here on the page. We have the mezzo piano at the very beginning. We have a crescendo that starts in the middle of measure 5 and goes up to measure 7. And then we have a decrescendo that starts at the end of measure 7 and ends on the fermata in measure 8. Finally, we have a mezzo piano written at measure 9. Since these are the dynamics that are specifically written on the page by the composer, we want to make sure that we're communicating them effectively to the judges. Now, if you go back and listen to the recording earlier in the video, you'll notice I added a bit more of crescendos and decrescendos than were marked in the etude. This will help communicate to the judges that not only can you read what's on the page, but you can interpret the music at a mature level and play it and perform it in a way that's musically engaging to the listener. So again, if you go back and listen, I had a crescendo that went up to the high C in measure 3 and came down to the low C in measure 4. I had another crescendo that went up to beat 3 of measure 10 and down towards the end of the measure. And then my final crescendo, I started in the last measure, went all the way to beat 3 of the final note, and then decrescendoed and tapered to the end. The last thing we want to talk about in terms of musicality is phrasing. Phrasing is basically how we make melodic and musical sense of the notes and rhythms we're playing. So I like to think about phrases as sentences. So we want to make sure our sentences are coherent and they end in very understandable points. So the best way to do that is through dynamic shaping, like we've already talked about, and planning your breaths. So if you go back and listen to the recording earlier in the video, you'll notice that I took a breath after the low C in measure 4. I took another breath after the second high B flat in measure 6. And I took another breath after the D flat fermata in measure 8. And then I took my final breath at the end of measure 10. If you'll notice, based on what's written in the etude, that mostly lines up with the phrase markings that are already there. So the etude is written well enough to where you can pretty much just follow the phrase markings and have a solid breath plan. Personally, with the first line, I think it's important to play through the second bar all the way through the third bar and fourth bar without breathing after that first phrase mark ends. If you breathe there, it kind of interrupts the phrase, and it doesn't sound very good. So play at a nice, comfortable mezzo piano in a way where you feel like you can make it all the way to that low C in measure 4 to make that one big coherent phrase. I hope this information helps you, and best of luck in the audition.